Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take stacks of sources, articles, historical texts, and deep research, and distill the most essential, fascinating nuggets of knowledge and insight, tailored specifically for you.
Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into the smallest state in the entire Union, the historically complex, culturally dense, and, well, geographically tiny Rhode Island.
It seems like a simple target, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Little Rhodey, the state ranked 50th in size. But I mean, right out of the gate, we run into this profound paradox that really defines its entire history.
That paradox is built right into its very identity. It is the smallest U.S. state by geography. Yet until just a few years ago, it had one of the longest official names in the country, State of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations.
So it's tiny yet verbose.
Tiny yet verbose, and also the second most densely populated state, trailing only New Jersey.
It's incredible how much history, industry, and just pure contradiction is crammed into an area that's only about 37 miles wide and 48 miles long. Our source material gives us a pretty comprehensive look at the state, covering everything from its colonial descent and its role as the cradle of the Industrial Revolution to its really unique culinary and cultural identity.
Yeah, and the central mission of this deep dive is to understand that compression. We want to know how this tiny geographic area became such a major incubator of American democracy, industry, and this fierce local culture. We're going to explore how a place founded by a religious refugee became an economic powerhouse built on, well, on contradiction.
Okay, let's unpack this, and we have to start with that name, because that change, the deliberate decision to redefine the state, is arguably the biggest recent historical and cultural event in Rhode Island.
Right. The full historical name, State of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, was a fixture. I mean, it was on official documents going all the way back to the colonial era. It was even enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. It carried the weight of centuries.
Yet tradition often collides with modern conscience. In November 2020, voters decisively approved a constitutional amendment to formally drop and Providence Plantations from the name.
What's absolutely fascinating here is the social and political shift that made that vote possible. The word plantation became a huge focus of debate because it highlighted the extensive and, frankly, often overlooked role slavery played in early Rhode Island history. The term carried, in the words of State Senator Harold Metz, a horrific connotation when you look at it through the lens of America's history with systemic racism.
And to really show how dramatic this turnaround was, you have to remember the context. Just 10 years earlier, in 2010, the exact same question was put to the voters.
And they overwhelmingly chose to keep the name.
Overwhelmingly. The margin was colossal, 78% against the change versus only 22% in favor.
So to see that public opinion flip so dramatically, moving from a massive rejection in 2010 to a tight but, definitive approval of 52.8% in 2020, that speaks volumes about the national reckoning happening that year. The momentum was really driven by increased public awareness and action after the George Floyd protests.
I remember that movement accelerating the change. Governor Gina Raimondo, she didn't even wait for the formal vote, did she?
No. She issued an executive order in June 2020 to immediately remove the phrase from official state documents and websites. It was a signal that the historical context of the name could no longer be ignored in the state's official identity.
So the state essentially decolonized its own name through a democratic process. That's a pretty significant marker for the 21st century.
It really is.
Okay, so we know why Providence Plantations was dropped, but that still leaves us with the origins of the remaining iconic yet kind of mysterious name, Rhode Island.
Well, the official long name came from the merger of the original settlements. You had the settlements on Aquidneck Island, which was called Rhode Island, and then the mainland settlements, known as Providence and Warwick Plantations.
Right, so the name Rhode Island, applying to the island and later the whole state, this is where things get wonderfully murky. There are two competing but both pretty well-documented theories.
The first, and maybe the most enduring theory, is the classical connection. In 1524, the explorer Giovanni de Verrazzano sailed near Narragansett Bay and noted an island he thought bore a striking resemblance to the Greek island of Rhodes.
In the Mediterranean.
Right. So later English colonists, looking to put a familiar European stamp on things, they assumed he meant Aquidneck Island, which is where Newport is.
That gives it a nice romantic origin story. But the second theory is maybe a bit more grounded in, well, New England reality. It comes from the Dutch explorer Adrian Block, who was charting the area in the 1610s.
And Block described the island in Dutch as Inrodelijk Eiland, which translates to a red or reddish island. Historians think this reddish look could have been from the dramatic red autumn foliage, classic New England, or maybe the distinctive reddish clay you can see along the shorelines.
And the Dutch documentation really strengthens this theory, doesn't it?
It does. We know that Dutch maps from as early as 1659 officially labeled the area as Rhode Island, which means Red Island. Meanwhile, the English were making their own notes. Roger Williams himself used the name Isle of Rhodes in a document from 1637, and the name was formally applied to Aquidneck Island in 1644 as the Isle of Rhodes or Rhode Island.
So whether the name came from Greek architecture or just the color of the local soil, it stuck, first to the island, then to the whole territory.
Exactly.
Which naturally leads us to the state's official current nickname, the one you see on all the license plates and welcome signs, the Ocean State.
And it's the most accurate description of its identity today. I mean, despite being the smallest state, Rhode Island has an impressive 400 miles or 640 kilometers of coastline. The sheer volume of water bays, inlets like Narragansett Bay, makes up about 14% of the state's total area. Water truly defines its geography, its economy, and its culture.
That focus on water and openness leads us directly to the state's foundation, which is a story of just radical defiance. We have to start with Roger Williams, who founded the settlement of Providence Plantations in 1636. He wasn't just a colonist, he was a political and religious refugee.
He was banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which was one of the most powerful and dogmatic English settlements in the New World. Williams's views were considered dangerously radical. He advocated for the absolute separation of church and state, and he insisted that the English government could not dictate religious belief.
So he established Providence, naming it because he had a sense of God's merciful providence unto me in my distress. He explicitly wanted to create a haven where all people, regardless of their religious creed, could find refuge.
And this was revolutionary. The Massachusetts Bay colonists were trying to build a city upon a hill, a Puritan ideal. Williams was building a place for dissenters, social outcasts, anyone fleeing that rigid enforcement of piety.
It quickly earned the nickname Rogues Island among its Puritan neighbors.
Oh, absolutely. They saw it as a sinkhole for religious and political nonconformists.
Williams's radicalism also extended to land ownership, which is so crucial to understanding that whole colonial relationship. He was unique among English settlers in believing the king and the crown had absolutely no legitimate claim to Native American territory.
Right. Our sources confirm he acquired the land for Providence from the Narragansett sachem Canonicus. Williams was meticulous about it, describing the payment not as a purchase, but as a gratuity, a gift for goodwill. He later wrote that even 1,000 fathom of wampum wouldn't have been enough to buy the land if the Narragansett didn't already trust him.
That established a foundation of relative peace and respect that was, highly unusual for the era.
It was. But that peace was fragile. Before colonization, the territory was inhabited by 5 main tribes, the Narragansett and Wampanoag being the most prominent, along with the Niantic, Pequot, and Nipmuc.
And as English encroachment increased across New England, that fragile peace just shattered, leading to King Philip's War between 1675 and 1676.
Yeah, and despite its early peaceful intentions, Rhode Island suffered immensely. Many towns, including Providence, were invaded and burned. Providence was burned twice, basically wiping out years of settlement.
The war culminated in December 1675 with one of the most brutal acts committed by the colonial militia, the Great Swamp Fight, where they invaded and destroyed a large, fortified Narragansett village in what is now South Kingstown,
killing hundreds of non-combatants in the process. It was horrific. And this conflict drives us straight into the state's most profound and painful contradiction, the paradox of slavery.
a beacon of religious freedom founded on tolerance, yet it became deeply implicated and financially reliant on the triangular slave trade.
I want to focus on that contradiction. Our sources note that in 1652, the colonial legislature actually passed what they recorded as the first act in a British colony abolishing the holding of slaves. That sounds incredibly progressive for the mid-17th century.
It does, and it speaks to Williams's original reforming spirit. The act, in theory, said that no person should be held in servitude for more than 10 years.
But the tragic footnote is that this edict was, quote, never enforced. The rising merchant class, particularly in Newport, saw the immense profits possible through human trafficking and just effectively subverted the law.
So the law existed on paper, but the reality was that the colony quickly grew wealthy, prospering heavily under the triangular trade system, specifically connecting the molasses and rum industries.
That's the engine of their early wealth. Rhode Island merchants developed this highly profitable trade loop. They would distill rum, Rhode Island, rum became infamous for its strength and how cheap it was, which was then shipped to West Africa and exchanged for enslaved people.
Those people were then transported to the Caribbean, where they were traded for molasses and sugar, which was brought back to Rhode Island to distill more rum.
It was a vicious, self-sustaining, and brutally efficient cycle of exploitation.
The numbers really hammer home the scope of this reliance compared to other New England states. By 1774, the slave population in Rhode Island was 6.3% of the total population.
And that percentage was nearly twice the ratio of any other New England colony. The state, founded on radical freedom, became disproportionately reliant on human bondage in the northern colonies.
That dual nature radical idealism versus brutal economic reality is absolutely central to understanding Rhode Island's history.
Yeah, it is. And despite this moral stain, colonial growth led to significant urban development. Newport, with its deep harbor and mercantile focus, was the third largest Anglo-American city by 1680. It remained a major, prosperous center right up until the Revolutionary War.
And their founding principles weren't completely lost. Alongside this booming maritime trade, educational institutions were established that reflected Williams's original vision. Brown University, founded in 1764, was one of the 9 colonial colleges, but it had a distinct feature.
Yes. Brown University was the first college in America to explicitly accept students regardless of their religious affiliation. It's a direct manifestation of that principle of religious liberty established a century earlier.
It's a powerful illustration of the state's internal conflict, a willingness to foster intellectual and religious openness while simultaneously resisting moral progress on racial freedom.
Exactly.
That fierce, independent streak of dissent meant that when the political tensions with Britain escalated, Rhode Island didn't wait for others to act. It became a genuine leader in the revolution, focusing on aggressive action.
The revolutionary credentials start early. The Gaspee Affair in 1772 is cited as the first act of armed rebellion against the British Crown in America. A group of Sons of Liberty from Providence attacked and burned the HMS Gaspee schooner in Narragansett Bay.
And this wasn't just vandalism. The Gaspee was a highly visible symbol of oppression. It was patrolling the bay to enforce customs laws designed to stifle colonial smuggling and trade.
So by destroying a Royal Naval vessel, they escalated the conflict dramatically. They proved that Rhode Islanders would not tolerate the Crown's interference with their profitable, if often illicit, maritime economy.
They were ready to formalize that dissent quickly. In 1774, Rhode Island was the first colony to formally call for a Continental Congress. And most famously, they hold the distinction of being the first of the 13 colonies to renounce its allegiance to the British Crown.
On May 4, 1776, a full 2 months before the Declaration of Independence was signed in Philadelphia.
They were the first to break up, but then, in a twist that is just pure Rogues Island, they were the last to reconcile.
The irony is rich. After leading the charge for independence, Rhode Island was the final state of the original 13 to ratify the new U.S. Constitution. They finally did it on May 29, 1790, nearly 3 years after the convention.
That's a huge holdout. What was the core reason for their prolonged suspicion of the new government?
Well, it was consistent with their founding identity. A deep-seated suspicion of powerful, centralized government. They were founded as a refuge from the tyranny of Massachusetts Bay, and they viewed the proposed strong federal government with extreme caution. They feared it would override state autonomy and local control.
They boycotted the 1787 convention entirely.
Entirely.
So if they were so ideologically opposed, what finally forced their hand in 1790?
Economic coercion. Basically, our sources indicate that the other 12 states grew tired of the holdout and started threatening to treat Rhode Island as a foreign country for trade purposes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the threat of heavy trade tariffs being levied on their goods, which would have devastated their economies, finally compelled them to ratify, but only after getting concrete assurances that a Bill of Rights would be quickly adopted to protect individual liberties and state powers. Their ratification was pragmatic, not ideological.
Even during the war itself, they pioneered military progress. The 1st Rhode Island Regiment holds a unique place in history. It was the first African-American military unit to fight for the U.S. in the Battle of Rhode Island in 1778.
And their geographical location proved vital to the wider war effort. In 1780, a massive French expeditionary force of 5,500 troops, commanded by Count Rochambeau, arrived in Newport. This was the staging ground for the celebrated and crucial march south to Yorktown, Virginia.
where the combined Franco-American forces delivered the final decisive blow against the British.
Precisely.
After the political revolution, Rhode Island didn't quit, it just redirected its revolutionary energy into industry. Pawtucket is officially the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution in the United States, which is a massive historical claim for such a small area.
It is, and it all revolves around one name, Samuel Slater. In 1793, Slater, using plans he had memorized and smuggled out of England since exporting textile technology was illegal, he set up the first commercially successful, fully mechanized, water-powered cotton spinning mill.
Slater Mill, right on the Blackstone River in Pawtucket.
Right. And that mechanical replication of the British Arkwright system was transformative. It led to the textile boom, creating intense urbanization and massive population movements, fundamentally restructuring the state's economy from a maritime trade focus to a manufacturing focus.
And this demand for labor dictated the demographics for the next century. This new industrial ecosystem drew enormous waves of immigrants seeking work, French-Canadian laborers pouring in from Quebec alongside massive influxes of Irish escaping the potato famine, Italians, and Portuguese.
They all arrived to fill the manufacturing and textile jobs.
This rapid growth created immense wealth, but it also created immense political injustice, which is another recurring theme here. Despite the industrial boom, the political system was still operating under the 1663 colonial charter.
Which was the problem. The old charter severely restricted voting rights, requiring men to own at least $134 in property. As the population urbanized and more men became propertyless factory workers, their political power just eroded.
I read that by 1840, only about 40% of white men were eligible to vote. That's down from an estimated 80% at the time of the Revolution. This inequality, coupled with the fact that legislative seats were unfairly apportioned to favor sparsely populated rural areas, it just boiled over into civil conflict.
It did. This was the catalyst for the Dorr Rebellion in the early 1840s. Activists, led by a lawyer named Thomas W. Dorr, drafted a rival constitution that dramatically expanded suffrage. They held unauthorized elections and attempted to establish a parallel state government, claiming popular sovereignty.
Wait, so they essentially had two competing governments operating at the same time. That sounds like a powder keg.
It was. When the established charter government refused to yield, Dorr supporters launched an armed rebellion against the arsenal in Providence. It was short-lived and ultimately failed, leading to Dorr's arrest and conviction for treason.
But sometimes failure catalyzes success. The sources make it clear that the rebellion, despite its quick defeat, forced the old guard to finally compromise.
Exactly. The pressure was too great to ignore. The legislature finally drafted a new constitution in 1842. And this new document made a critical change. It replaced the restrictive property requirements for American-born citizens with a simple $1 poll tax.
And the social consequences were immediate and dramatic, though still unequal.
The first major consequence was that it re-enfranchised black men who had historically been able to vote until property requirements were tightened in 1822. The second result was the legal final end of slavery in Rhode Island.
But it was a carefully orchestrated political move.
Oh, yes. Immigrants, specifically the rapidly growing and influential Irish-American voting bloc, were not granted this privilege and remained subject to the restrictive property requirements. The political establishment wanted industrial labor, but they didn't want the political power of that labor.
That's a perfect example of how the struggle for democracy in America often proceeds one uneven step at a time. This intense economic dynamism and political tension led to the state's halcyon era during the Gilded Age, defined by extreme economic contrasts.
On one hand, you had Providence and Pawtucket, dense, smoke-choked industrial mill towns where laborers worked brutal hours for low wages. On the other hand, you had Newport, which became the ultimate summer destination for New York's wealthiest industrialists.
The famous Newport mansions, like the Breakers, stand as a testament to that vast wealth disparity. The same industrialists who owned the textile mills and railroads that employed the working class in Providence spend millions building these palatial 3-month summer homes, essentially creating a second capital for American high society.
The labor that built the industrial wealth was completely separate from the leisure that consumed it.
And a brief word on later history confirms this cycle of progress and reaction.
Right. During the Civil War, Rhode Island was the first Union state to respond to Lincoln's call for troops, contributing over 23,000 men. They also abolished racial segregation in public schools in 1866, decades before the rest of the nation.
Yet the sources also tragically detail a surge in Ku Klux Klan membership in rural Rhode Island during the 1920s and 30s, highlighting the burning of the Watchman Industrial School for African American children in Scituate. The state's history is a microcosm of the national fight between progressive ideals and entrenched prejudices.
Let's shift back to the geography because the state's small size is paradoxically its greatest strength and its greatest vulnerability. We are talking about a land area that is a mere 37 miles wide and 48 miles long.
It's the equivalent of a highly concentrated laboratory, but as we noted, the water factor is everything. The entire state identity is defined by the massive Narragansett Bay, which carves deeply into the eastern part of the state and contains over 30 islands.
The largest and most famous island is Aquidneck, home to Newport, Middletown, and Portsmouth. Then you have Connecticut Island, where Jamestown is located, and Prudence Island. These islands are crucial to the state's economic and tourist life.
And then there's Block Island, which stands alone, about 12 miles off the coast, separating the Block Island Sound from the open Atlantic. It acts almost as a separate geological entity, which is interesting when we look at the topography.
The mainland topography is generally low and rolling. It's mostly flat. The state's mean elevation is only about 200 feet above sea level. The highest natural point is Jermouth Hill, which is a modest 812 feet.
It's often joked that climbing Jermouth Hill involves stepping over a few stones.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But the geology holds a secret. Let's talk about the official state rock. Cumberlandite. This isn't just any rock. It's a rare iron ore found only in Cumberland within the United States.
So what makes it so special?
It's chemically distinct. Cumberlandite is incredibly dense and highly magnetic due to its iron content. It was so concentrated and unique that there were only 2 known deposits of it globally, and one of those deposits in Cumberland was extensively mined for its ferrous content, underscoring how this geological quirk was directly tied to the state's early industrial mining activities.
So it reinforces its industrial heritage. Now, let's consider the climate, because being the ocean state exposes them to everything the ocean throws at them. The climate is scientifically classified as a transition zone. It sits right on the border between the humid continental climates to the north and the subtropical climates further south.
This means they experience the full spectrum, warm to hot, humid summers, followed by cool, wet winters with a mix of snow and rain. Block Island, because it's far enough offshore, actually maintains a purely oceanic climate, which is milder year-round.
And the temperature extremes reflect that transition zone volatility. A record high of 104 degrees Fahrenheit in Providence back in 1975, and a bone-chilling record low of minus 23 degrees in Greene in 1996.
But the real defining vulnerability is coastal. Because the seashore is so flat and the population is so dense along the coastline, Rhode Island is extremely susceptible to tropical storms and hurricanes. The historical record is grim. The 1938 New England hurricane devastated the area, followed by Hurricane Carol in '54, Donna in '60, and Bob in '91, all causing massive damage.
And this vulnerability is increasing exponentially with climate change. That flat seashore means the state faces a significant and exacerbated risk from storm surge and coastal erosion due to rising sea levels.
It's an existential threat to its geography. In response, the state has positioned itself as an environmental leader. In 2021, the state passed the Act on Climate, which legally mandates increasingly stringent emissions reduction requirements with a clear and ambitious goal of reaching net zero emissions by 2050.
They've also been proactive on toxic cleanup, leveraging federal resources. Rhode Island has received EPA grants specifically for cleaning up brownfield sites, which are abandoned or underused properties contaminated by prior industrial use, a remnant of their industrial history.
And what really stands out here is that Rhode Island was the first U.S. state to pass a school siting bill back in 2012. This bill strictly prohibits school construction on brownfield sites where toxic vapors could potentially affect indoor air quality. That's a major public health first, using their small scale and high density to implement protective legislation quickly.
Moving from the land to the people who give Little Rhodey its huge cultural punch. We keep emphasizing the density. Second most densely populated state at about 1,000 residents per square mile. That means culture and history are constantly rubbing up against each other.
And the center of this population is centralized in the city of Cranston. The demographic profile is a living map of the state's history as a hub for industry and immigration. The major ancestry groups are direct descendants of those 19th century migrations: Irish, 18.3%, Italian, 18.0%, French, 10.4%, and Portuguese, 9.3%.
And these populations settled in very distinct patterns. Italian Americans form a solid plurality in central Providence County, French Canadian Americans dominate the northern towns, and the Irish have maintained a strong historical presence in Newport and Kent counties.
But Rhode Island is also defined by uniquely concentrated communities of more recent arrivals. It has the highest percentage of Portuguese Americans in the entire country, primarily concentrated in areas like East Providence and Bristol County.
And beyond that, the sources detail two other highly notable immigrant communities, a sizable Liberian community of over 15,000 residents, and the highest percentage of Dominican Americans in the entire country, currently standing at 5.1%.
Yeah, that density makes their immigrant impact immediate and visible. The state is clearly diversifying rapidly. The non-Hispanic white population has seen a massive decline over the last few decades, dropping from 96.1% in 1970 to 76.5% by 2011. The cultural mosaic is constantly being refined.
This historical immigration flow, especially from Ireland, Italy, and French Canada, explains why Rhode Island has historically maintained the highest proportion of Catholic residents of any state, measuring 42% in a 2014 survey.
But again, the founding principle of religious freedom endures. The Tours Synagogue in Newport remains the oldest existing synagogue building in the United States, a tangible physical testament to Roger Williams' 17th century guarantee that people of all faiths, including Jewish settlers who arrived very early, would be protected.
Okay, let's talk about something incredibly local and specific: the unique Rhode Island accent and vocabulary. Linguists classify the traditional accent as non-rhotic, which means you drop the R sound at the end of words or before a consonant. It sits somewhere between the traditional Boston and New York City accents.
Exactly. If you're a tourist, you're not just listening for dropped R's. You're listening for that highly distinctive, strong aw sound. So when discussing the beverage we'll talk about shortly, you don't ask for a cup of coffee. It's pronounced closer to Cork-Hi-Fi.
The accent is one thing, but the local vocabulary is a landmine for outsiders. There are three terms in particular that you must know if you want to sound even remotely local.
The first is bubbler. That is what everyone else calls a drinking fountain. You might find it hilarious, but it's universally accepted there.
A bubbler. Got it. The second one is even more confusing, I think. What is a cabinet?
A cabinet is a milkshake.
Wait, so if I go to a local diner and ask for a chocolate cabinet, I'm getting a chocolate milkshake. Seriously.
You are. It's purely the name, though some purists argue a true cabinet uses ice cream, milk, and flavored syrup blended together. But yes, ask for a cabinet and you'll get a milkshake. It's just the word they use.
Amazing. And finally, the third word is grinders.
Grinders is the universal term for any overstuffed, foot-long sandwich, what most of the Northeast calls a sub, hoogie, or hero. The term grinder is believed to derive from the fact that it took some serious grinding of the teeth to chew through the tough bread and filling.
Bubblers, cabinets, and grinders. I love that. That brings us to the most beloved part of Rhode Island culture: the food. Being the ocean state means they take seafood seriously, but they also have entirely unique regional staples.
They don't just have clam chowder, they have their clam chowder.
Right.
Alongside the standard white New England's and red Manhattan varieties, Rhode Island developed a unique clear broth clam chowder. It's light, simple, and showcases the clam flavor without the heavy cream or tomato base.
And the necessary accompaniment to chowder is the clam cake.
The clam cake is the quintessential summer meal. These are savory, deep-fried balls of buttery dough mixed with chopped clam bits. Outside the state, they are often called clam footers, but here they're clam cakes, and they are typically consumed by the dozen along the beaches.
They also utilize the large local clam, the quahog, for other staples. You mentioned stuffies.
A stuffy is a glorious invention. It involves grinding the quahog and mixing the meat with a savory stuffing, often incorporating spices, breadcrumbs, or even spicy minced Portuguese sausage, and then baking the mixture back into the large clam shell. It's a hearty, flavorful dish that really showcases the local seafood.
Reflecting that strong immigrant influence, the state has even codified its appetizer status. In 2014, calamari fried squid became the official state appetizer.
And it is served in a distinctly local way, reflecting the Italian-American plurality. They typically serve it Sicilian style, often with sliced banana peppers tossed into the fry mix and marinara sauce on the side. We also have to credit Rhode Island for inventing Clams Casino.
Oh, really?
Yes. It originated at the original Narragansett Casino by a maitre d' in the 1890s, preparing the dish for a wealthy client.
Finally, we arrive at the most unique beverage in the state, one that non-Rhode Islanders rarely grasp: coffee milk.
Yes, the official state drink. This isn't cold coffee mixed with milk. It's milk mixed with coffee syrup, which was invented and is widely sold in the state. It's a sweet, caffeinated treat that has been a childhood staple for generations.
And to fully cover the culinary landscape, we go back to the colonial era with Johnny Cakes, simple patties made of cornmeal and water, pan-fried like thin pancakes, and reflecting the Portuguese heritage, linguiça or chorizo, the spicy sausages that are absolute local favorite.
Often served with peppers, yeah.
Let's examine how this incredibly dense, culturally rich state functions today. While its historical foundation was built on those textile mills, today's economy is primarily service-based.
Right. Healthcare is now the largest single industry, a massive employer throughout the state, followed closely by education, anchored by institutions like Brown, RASD, and the University of Rhode Island. Tourism also remains vital, supporting an estimated 39,000 jobs.
Yet the industrial legacy hasn't vanished. Manufacturing still contributes significantly to the GDP, especially high-value industries like submarine construction and shipbuilding, much of it related to the Navy presence, and the production of costume jewelry, which is a long-standing tradition.
And despite its size, Rhode Island hosts major corporate players. You have Fortune 500 and 1,000 companies headquartered here, including CVS Caremark in Woonsocket, the aerospace and defense giant Textron in Providence, Citizens Financial Group, which is the 14th largest bank in the U.S., Hasbro, and the major insurer FM Global.
The presence of these corporate headquarters speaks to Rhode Island's strategic logistical location. It acts as an important connector between the massive markets of Boston and New York City.
It does. And interestingly, the sources highlight that Rhode Island is rated as the 5th most energy-efficient state in the country and has the lowest energy consumption per capita of any state.
That efficiency is reflected in their infrastructure. When it comes to transportation, they are absolutely crucial to the high-speed arteries of the Northeast Corridor.
That's right. Rhode Island is one of only 4 states with high-speed NEEC tracks capable of 165 miles per hour, upgraded specifically for the Acela Express service. Amtrak serves Providence, Kingston, and Westerly, making it a critical hub for high-speed travel between Washington, D.C. and Boston.
And locally, the state is looking toward a greener, faster future. The Rhode Island Public Transit Authority, RIPTA, has released a draft of their ambitious transit master plan for 2040.
That plan is massive. It includes proposals for bus rapid transit systems, express bus routes to decongest the major corridors, and even the construction of a new light rail network through downtown Providence, recognizing that the sheer population density demands more efficient public transit solutions.
Connecting all of this is the bridge network across Narragansett Bay. Major interstates like I-95 and I-195, and the iconic Claiborne-Pell-Newport Bridge and the Jamestown-Verrazano Bridge, which are essential for linking the islands to the mainland.
And they also invest heavily in recreational infrastructure, notably the East Bay Bike Path and the Washington Secondary Bike Path.
To close out the historical narrative, we need to return to the idea that Rhode Island has consistently punched above its weight. Let's run through a handful of the most surprising and unique firsts that this little state pioneered.
We mentioned it, but it bears repeating because of its profound contradiction. The first colonial law prohibiting slavery, passed in 1652, highlighting that early progressive spirit.
Then, in conflict, the first naval engagement of the American Revolution took place off their coast in 1775 with the burning of the Gaspee. They were not waiting for permission.
And in the media, a major first. Anne Smith Franklin, working for the Newport Mercury, became the first female newspaper editor in America in 1762. This happened 14 years before American independence. Technology followed rapidly. Pelham Street in Newport became the first American city street to be illuminated by gaslight in 1806, showing their willingness to adopt new, practical industrial technologies quickly.
Jumping ahead to the industrial era, after Slater Mill got rolling, Pawtucket also saw the first strike in the U.S. involving women in 1824, as female textile workers organized against wage cuts and poor conditions.
For a moment of levity, Watch Hill hosts the nation's oldest continuously operating flying horses carousel, running since 1850. It's a wonderful piece of preserved Americana.
And 2 major technological innovations originated in Providence. The motion picture machine was patented there in 1867, and then the first lunch wagon in America, the precursor to the modern food truck, was introduced in Providence in 1872.
Finally, the architecture. The Rhode Island State House, built between 1895 and 1901, was the first building in the U.S. with an all-marble dome, using 327,000 cubic feet of white Georgia marble to make an architectural statement far larger than the state itself.
Their sports history is equally impressive. The Providence Grays won the first world championship in baseball history back in 1884. And speaking of baseball, McCoy Stadium holds the distinction of hosting the longest professional baseball game ever played.
A marathon clocking in at 33 innings.
Unbelievable.
And we can't forget Newport, which remains a global center for tennis. It houses the International Tennis Hall of Fame at the historic Newport Casino, which was the original site of the first U.S. National Championships in 1881.
In pop culture, we have to recognize the influence of Seth MacFarlane. His massively popular animated show Family Guy is based entirely in the fictional Rhode Island city of Quahog.
Yeah, the show constantly lampoons local culture and sites like Peter Griffin working at the Pawtucket Brewery. And one cannot talk about Rhode Island landmarks without mentioning the big blue bug nibbles wood away.
The giant termite.
The 58-foot-long termite mascot for an extermination business in Providence has become such a cultural landmark that during the COVID-19 pandemic, locals famously provided it with a giant face mask to encourage public safety. It's a symbol of their practical humor.
And to close out the quirks, the unique holiday. Rhode Island is the only state in the U.S. that still celebrates Victory over Japan Day, officially known simply as Victory Day, held on the second Monday in August.
It's one last way. Little Rhodey insists on standing apart from the other 49. We've thoroughly charted the contradictions inherent in this state. We've seen the revolutionary legacy of Roger Williams, the emotional and political complexities of the dramatic name change, its role as the cradle of the Industrial Revolution, and the dense, vibrant culture defined by clear broth chowder and grinders.
What stands out to me is that consistent pattern of fighting for autonomy and progress, whether it was the early push for religious freedom, the intense civil strife of the Dorr Rebellion for suffrage rights, or leading the way for American industry at Slater Mill. They never stopped defining themselves.
It's a place defined by its water, its history, and its unique rules. Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you to consider as you finish this deep dive: the ongoing struggle over the meaning of the ocean state itself.
The Rhode Island State Constitution explicitly protects the public's right to shoreline access, including the rights to swimming and gathering seaweed. That sounds like a powerful guarantee of public ownership over their essential geography.
But the devil is in the details of the law. Current interpretation often defines private land access as ending at the mean high tide line. The problem is that boundary is incredibly difficult to determine on a day-to-day basis, creating a constant ambiguity that favors private landowners.
This legal ambiguity has led to constant, often aggressive conflicts between wealthy landowners and the public, with often lax enforcement against illegal encroachment or the building of structures that block public access.
So the question that little Rhodey must answer is this: how does the smallest state reconcile the constitutional public right to its essential geography, its very identity as the ocean state, with the growing desire for privatization of that beautiful, finite coastline? What is the real definition of the ocean state if the public's access to the ocean is consistently contested?
It's a contradiction built right into the sand. The state that pioneered freedom for dissenters still fights over who gets to step on the beach. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Rhode Island. We hope you feel thoroughly well informed.